Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the January 23rd, 2024 San Joaquin Valley REAP webinar. We have a great topic today about water and housing in the valley, so I know you'll find it interesting. And before we start, let me just quickly introduce people on the panel here today. Our co-manager of the REAP program, Robert Phipps, Fresno COG. Then we have Randy Hatch with our REAP planning team as well. Randy. Then our panelists today from Rincon Consultants, Emily McCord and Rosalind Prickett. Go ahead and say hello. I'll turn the mic over to them in a little bit. They can give a longer introduction. But once again, thank you. This is 2 years now with the REAP webinar, so we appreciate your you constantly watching what we have to present. A few house rules. If you have a question, there's a question and answer function. You can raise your hand or you can use the chat. We'll monitor all three of those and call on you as appropriate. The webinar today is about 1 hour, probably a little bit less. The presentation's about 20-25 minutes, so we'll hope to wait till questions till the end unless there's some really pressing issues to address. This webinar is eligible for APA AICP credit, and I'll put the course number in the chat box in a little bit. The recording for this webinar, the slide deck that will be presented today, and the longer final report will be posted to the REAP workshop website in a few days here. And I'll also send everybody who's on this webinar today a post-webinar evaluation survey, if you don't mind filling that out. So let's go ahead and get started. Emily, Muslim, I'll turn it over to you.
Michael, if I may real quick, I'm sorry, just a couple of things. One is, again, thank you everyone for being here. If you have questions, you're welcome to put those into the Q&A, or if you would like to ask them directly, just raise your hand and we can unmute you. We do ask that all questions go into the Q&A, and we can provide those, all those that you choose not to ask yourself directly, go into the Q&A, and we can pull those for you and make sure that those get answered live. And also wanted to give a shout out to our friends in Kern County who asked us to conduct this study, and a big thanks to Rincon Consultants. This is an important study about a big issue throughout the San Joaquin Valley, and it's a long time in the works. So thank you to all of our participants today, and to the consultants, Emily, Rosalind, who took on this gigantic task. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. And before they start, let me just make a couple more plugs here. One is for the annual policy conference this year. It's in Visalia at the Visalia Convention Center. The dates are April 29th to May 1st. This is a pretty good conference for the Valley. It's always been a good showing every year. So if you want more information, I'll put this flyer in the chat. And the next plug I was going to do was concurrent with that is we have the Valley Blueprint Awards, San Joaquin Valley Blueprint Awards for development projects, planning projects, staff, and elected officials. So these awards are given every year at the policy conference on the flyer I just posted. So I will put this in the chat as well, and feel free to take a look at it and see if any of your great local projects might be eligible for this award. All right, thank you. Go ahead, Emily and Rosalind.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rosalind Prickett. I'm with Rincon Consultants. I'm about 23 years in the industry. I specialize in water resources planning for water districts and municipalities across California, mostly in Southern California. My colleague here is Emily McCord. She is a watershed scientist. She specializes in water resources, data management and analytics, and groundwater management under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So we are really excited to be here with you today to share with you the study that we conducted for the REAP program, where essentially we were looking at the question, do San Joaquin Valley's groundwater sustainability plans accommodate for RHNA growth? So as you all probably are aware, the Regional Early Action Planning, the REAP program, is a state-funded grant program to help regions with planning activities to address the regional housing needs assessment and to spur affordable housing. So under that program, there's a variety of technical assistance studies and reports that are being conducted. This particular study is a water supply study looking at San Joaquin Valley. The next slide shows a variety of the other deliverables that have been completed under the REAP program. I'm sure you all have had the opportunity to listen to presentations much like this on each of these programs addressing housing laws and inclusionary policy and cottage home design, things like that. So this is a pretty cool program, and we're excited that water was considered as an important component of the REAP program. So our study purpose was twofold. First, to improve the linkage between land use planning and water management, or to better understand that linkage at least. And primarily it was to evaluate the adequacy of water supply that has been identified in the water management plans across the valley to accommodate projected RHNA growth. So in terms of drivers for residential growth, above and beyond the market drivers, of course, are the regional housing needs assessment itself. This is what requires local municipalities to plan and zone for adequate housing to accommodate anticipated population. As you know, California HCD, Housing and Community Development, works with local council of governments to develop, to assign these RHNA growth numbers, and the COGs then develop their RHNA plans. The focus is fair and affordable housing for very low, and moderate income households. In terms of drivers for water management, SGMA is a huge driver for the water industry. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was passed in 2014. It essentially requires local agencies to proactively manage groundwater supplies, groundwater quality, and ecosystems, or to relinquish control of pumping to the state. If you can't manage your own affairs, you've got to relinquish that control, and the state will then dictate pumping levels to all of the users within those basins. And as residents of San Joaquin Valley, I'm sure you've all heard of SGMA. I mean, has been the hot topic for the last 5-6 years, as all of the water suppliers within the valley and statewide have been developing these plans. So what SGMA requires is that a water agency, or if nobody else volunteers, the county, must file as a groundwater sustainability agency, a GSA, to voluntarily manage groundwater within their service areas. So within a groundwater basin, you might have one GSA, the county, that covers the entire basin. You might have individual GSAs that manage their service area only, but those GSAs must coordinate with all of the other folks within the basin to sustainably manage supplies. And what we mean by sustainably manage is all of the water that's coming into the basin, either through stream flow or precipitation or recharge projects, must balance with all of the outflow, which would include primarily groundwater pumping, but also stream outflow. So to do this, the GSAs are then required to develop a GSP, a groundwater sustainability plan, which is essentially a roadmap of how a groundwater basin will achieve sustainability within a 20-year period. Part of that process is looking at how much pumping is going to be needed to adequately serve the folks within our basin, and how much supply do we have available. So that process is called a water budget. We'll talk a little bit more about water budgets later in the presentation. So this is our study area. Our study area covers the 8 counties within San Joaquin Valley: Fresno, Kern, Kings, Madera, Merced, San Joaquin, Stanislaus, and Tulare counties. You can see that outlined here in the yellow. We address portions of 3 hydrologic regions, and those hydrologic regions are defined by the state of California. So you can see here we cover about half of the San Joaquin River hydrologic region, almost all of Tulare Lake, and a very small portion of South Wahan. Now, groundwater comprises about 40% of the state's water supply portfolio, in addition to recycled water, surface water supplies, and even ocean desal. There are 17 subbasins within San Joaquin Valley. You can see here, we've got a zoomed in map of what we were showing earlier with just our study area here, still outlined in yellow. And there's 17 basins that are subject to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, SGMA, that I mentioned earlier. Those are the basins that are shown in blue on this map. There are 4 basins in the study area that are adjudicated. So if you're adjudicated, essentially the state understands that you've identified what your sustainable yield is, you've defined what pumping can occur, and you are essentially forced to be sustainable and in balance. So you're not subject to SGMA. Although interestingly, there are a couple of adjudicated basins within the state that have opted to create groundwater sustainability plans, but they're not required to. There's also 5 basins that are not prioritized by the state. So the beginning of the SGMA process, the state went through and decided what is a really important basin to become sustainable and what's low or very low priority. And so 5 basins were not prioritized and therefore don't have to comply. Those adjudicated and not prioritized basins are shown in the gray down in the bottom and primarily are located within the Kern County area. So here's a map that shows those priorities that were established by the state. You can see here that in the legend, it shows that the very low basins are shown in the green, low is in yellow, medium in orange, and high in red. So of those 17 basins, subbasins in the valley, 13 of those subbasins are high priority. That means there is significant municipal pumping. The state in their prioritization was really concerned with domestic pumping. And is there municipal and domestic pumping in a basin that's having issues, that's in overdraft, that has water quality concerns? Those are the basins that DWR determined, the State Department of Water Resources determined needed to be addressed first. Those are those high priority basins. And then overlaid on that prioritization, the state applied critically overdrafted. These are the basins that have been in overdraft, that have been pumping more than the inflows in their basin for decades. And in those basins, a critically overdraft overlay was applied. You can see in the sort of white gray hatch on this map that almost all of the subbasins, 11 of the 17 are considered critically overdrafted. And there was priority given to those subbasins by the state. Those subbasins had to write their GSPs sooner, and they had some additional financial support, essentially, to try to get those basins a kickstart in becoming more sustainable. Now, in addition to groundwater, there is a wide range of other supplies that are available to domestic, municipal, and agricultural users throughout the valley. In terms of surface water, the Central Valley Project is shown here in the red. You can see some of the canals that are identified in that red color. The Central Valley Project is managed by the United States Bureau of Reclamation. It's about 400 miles in length throughout the Central Valley, starting up at Shasta Dam. The Central Valley Project primarily serves agricultural users and has about 250 long-term contractors. The State Water Project serves 5 of the subbasins within the San Joaquin Valley, and that's shown in the mustard color, mostly down in the California Aqueduct, down in the sort of lower southern area. The State Water Project is managed by the State Department of Water Resources, DWR, same entity that's managing implementation of SGMA. There are 29 State Water Project contractors throughout the state. That system is actually 700 miles from Lake Oroville all the way down to Southern California to the LA basin. And you can see the distribution of users in the State Water Project is about 2/3 municipal and about 1/3 agricultural supplies. You can see there's also a hatched stretch of the Delta Mendota Canal and the San Luis Canal there. That the San Luis Canal is actually a shared resource between the CVP and the State Water Project. There are also 12 rivers and associated reservoirs throughout the San Joaquin Valley. You can see them mapped here from the McCollum River up in the northern part of the San Joaquin Valley down to the Kern River in the south, all labeled in the blue along with their associated reservoirs. And then multiple conveyance canals So things like the Los Angeles Aqueduct and the Cross Valley Canal that help to convey supplies to individual users. Now, in terms of recycled water, there are a number of different recycled water plants throughout the San Joaquin Valley. Those were all mapped in the purple squares shown here. Traditionally, recycled water is served for irrigation and municipal and agricultural users, as well as some industrial uses like cooling towers and things like this. Any recycled water that's not used for non-potable purposes is generally infiltrated into the ground through infiltration ponds. So that tertiary or secondary treated water from those treatment plants is then percolated and actually does make up part of the water budget for the groundwater supply.
So as you can probably guess, new housing induces demand. So new housing increases the amount of water supply that's needed. And we wanted to quantify this demand as part of this study. So in order to do that, we used the RHNA allocations and census data to estimate a population increase across each basin from these RHNA allocations. And then we used information from urban water management plans, which are these plans that urban water suppliers with more than 3,000 service connections are required to submit. And they sort of have things like population estimates, water demand estimates, and looking at sort of urban supply availability. And so we used these plans for a lot of the estimations and calculations in the study. And specifically, we used the water demand per capita that these urban water management plans were estimating to estimate an associated water demand from our population increase estimates for the RHNA housing. And we estimated a low demand scenario and a high demand scenario. So we had sort of a range of increased demand estimates. The low demand scenario was only looking at residential water use. The high demand scenario was looking at residential and also associated commercial and industrial use with population increase. So once we calculated this RHNA-induced population and growth and associated demand, which is what this bar graph on the right shows, our sort of low demand in blue, and then the additional for our high demand scenario in green. We then evaluated the GSPs for their, looked at their urban and municipal water demands, and we calculated what we were calling a water demand gap. So we basically took the difference between our estimates for increased demand and the GSP's estimates for increased municipal demand, and looked at what the difference was to ascertain whether the GSPs were sort of calculating enough or estimating enough municipal water supply to include the population and growth from the RHNA numbers. So, and that's what this table on the right shows. So it's the demand gap for each of the subbasins. In green are the subbasins that did not have a difference in the estimated demand from the GSPs versus what we estimated from the RHNA numbers. And then the other 11 subbasins were not adequately planning for RHNA water demands. But you'll probably notice that at the bottom, you'll see the total between sort of estimates is somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 acre feet per year. And it should be noted the projected urban and municipal demand is really small in comparison to agricultural demand in San Joaquin Valley, which is about more than 7.6 million acre feet and pumping valley-wide. So urban demand is a pretty small portion of the total demand in the valley. As part of the study, we also looked at the projected water supply projects that the GSPs had. So each of the GSPs has this whole section where they look at projects that can be used to create new water supply, things like conveyance and distribution, direct recharge, increased conservation and efficiency in water use, treating surface water using recycled and reclaimed water, using surface water treating, increased surface water storage, reducing pumping, and then some other sort of anything that is projects that can be used to increase water supply. And we took a look at these, and we summarized the water budget findings. Those are the water budgets that Rosalind was talking about earlier. We looked at the estimated benefits from all of the projected water supply projects and their costs. So you can see that overall, most of the GSPs believe that with these projects, there will be imbalance, that they will be sustainable in the future. But in order to do this, they need an estimated 2.8 million acre feet per year, and that is the total of all of the collective projects, the estimated annual benefit that they will produce in water supply. And the estimated project cost for all of these projects is almost $4.4 billion. So it's pretty significant investment needed in order to become in balance or become sustainable across all of these basins. So finally looked at sort of opportunities and constraints related to infrastructure. Sort of one of the things we wanted to point out is that even though urban demand is sort of a very small portion of the total demand in the valley, it's firm and it requires more specific infrastructure than agricultural water deliveries. So it is still very important, even though it's a smaller part of the total demand. The treatment of wastewater and the delivery of recycled water is a potential new supply to meet water demands, as we sort of noted earlier, and when some of the projects are related to recycled water and wastewater treatment. But it should be noted that we really need to carefully carefully consider the impacts on groundwater budgets with these new supplies, because sometimes they're treated as new supply when really they're already being infiltrated into the ground and just not used for specific supply. So that might not be necessarily new supply. So that just needs to be considered. One opportunity there is that we found was that we should be able to leverage statewide efforts to build wet weather flow capture and recharge facilities. There's a lot of efforts right now about making sure that we increase wet weather flow capture. And then also state and federal investments are needed to support capital project implementation. As I noted earlier, more than $4.4 billion is required if the GSPs are going to implement all of the projects that they've identified. And finally, we took all of the information and all of the sort of the summaries that we looked at between all the GSPs, and we identified areas of concern based on the sort of all the water demand estimates and the sustainability in the GSPs. And we, as you can see in this map over here, Kern County was noted to be of greatest concern, given that it's in critical overdraft. It has, we identified that there is a RHNA demand gap, and not all of the GSPs in Kern County can achieve sustainability, even with the project implementation. 10 additional basins in our study area have a RHNA demand gap, and these should be accounted for in their 5-year GSP updates.
I think that's one of the most important findings from this particular study is really that while SGMA made a concerted effort to require the water agencies to coordinate directly with land use planners and municipalities on the land use growth projections within their communities, it still wasn't good enough. And with RHNA projections and the fact that those change in each of the cycles, there really is a concerted need for the water agencies and land use planners to stay connected and to make sure that the demands associated with this housing are considered in the GSP updates. And the GSPs, when they're looking at their water budgets, they're making sure that there are those demands that are incorporated. Each of the GSPs is undertaking a 5-year update in the coming couple of years. I know, for example, in Kern County, we found that Kern County was made up originally of multiple GSPs, and some of those GSPs just flat out stated we can't be sustainable. And I understand that Kern County's GSAs are working together to coordinate and to submit some revised groundwater planning to the state. So there's certainly this RHNA housing development and the growth projections are certainly need to be part of that conversation and incorporated into those revised plans as they are resubmitted to the state and then updated in the periodic updates. So our primary findings are that the GSPs did underestimate projected urban demand associated with RHNA housing. There was no doubt about that. If we look at all of the housing units forecast under RHNA, we convert that to water demands and we compare that to what the GSPs are planning for, there just simply isn't enough. Now, that being said, as Emily pointed out previously, that's a very, very small proportion of the amount of water that is being used in the valley. So that 4,000 to 6,000 acre feet demand pales in comparison to the 7 million acre feet of groundwater pumping that is occurring, and the 2.8 million acre feet in GSP projects that are being planned. So with efficient use of water in housing and by municipal users, I think, you know, that additional demand could certainly be provided for with those projects. The GSPs do generally claim groundwater basin balance and the ability to be sustainable through project implementation. I did note that one of our GSPs in Kern doesn't, but for the most part, it's magic. All of the water agencies have determined that they can be sustainable. But there's a price tag to that. And as you saw, the next slide, there are significant investments that are needed in water supply acquisition and storage. So there really is a wish list, a grand wish list of water supply projects that'll need to be implemented in order to achieve basin sustainability, in order to achieve that balance between demand and supply, and provide the additional supply needed for the RHNA housing forecast. And finally, I want to make a plug as you are working with your lobbyists in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento. You know, this message can't be said louder. Local, state, and federal investments are needed for these water supply projects in order to bring the basins into sustainability. So that $4.3 billion price tag really needs support by the federal and state governments. And I think there's certainly through the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act program at the state, each of those critically overdrafted basins received a pretty good chunk of seed money to start that process. Like I said, to kickstart that process at the beginning. But this was a really interesting study. It was fun to look at supply and demand on such a broad scale across the entire San Joaquin Valley. And we look forward to answering any questions that you might have for us. So thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosalind. And we do have at least one question right now. Here they start coming. I didn't see a fee for Turlock. This is from Erica Ignacio. I didn't see a fee for Turlock. It says NA. Can you give the reason for that, please?
On the slide with the costs associated with water supply projects, if a GSA did not include costs in their GSP, we did not generate those costs ourselves. So as we were reviewing the GSPs, these are the numbers we were pulling from the GSPs in terms of how much new water supply could be created through implementation of their projects. And in this case, it was full implementation. This is that 20-year horizon. And those costs were pulled directly from the GSP. So they just weren't there.
Okay, thank you. And then from Carl Davison in Kern, we noticed a couple of things. One, in the PDF on page 10, table 4, Kern and Kings County's information is swapped. And number 2, on page 12, table 5, Kern County has Kings County's info.
You know, we caught that second one actually as we were prepping for today's presentation. Thank you so much for noting those two. And I will make sure those two are changed in the revised. We'll upload a revised file to the website in the next couple of days. So thank you for those.
Thank you. So yeah, a lot of information here, very, very dense presentation. Right now, there are no other questions pending. Again, if you would like to ask a question directly, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Or you can put your question into the Q&A. but happy to take any additional questions. So, I mean, while we're waiting to see if anyone has anything else, and I think you did kind of summarize this already, Rosalind and Emily, but essentially, what the study finds is that the Sigma requirements can be met on a valley-wide basis, but only if all projected projects are put into place. And there's concern, I assume for context, there's some concern over the total cost of all those projects at over $4 billion and the likelihood that that actually is going to be realized. Is that a fair, quick summary?
That's a fair assessment. I've been working with water agencies for over 20 years now, and I know how fast water infrastructure projects are built, especially new supply projects where interagency agreements need to be established, new infrastructure needs to be installed. So, you know, those supply projects do take time. The GSPs did do modeling for each of those basins. They did determine they could generally be sustainable with those capital project investments. So yes, our concern is simply, you know, are we as a state able to build, or as a valley able to build this amount of projects in order to serve the projected growth?
Right, and we may not know definitively the answer to that until the next RHNA cycle or later, depending on how you know, and also what how much time would the GSPs have to institute all this before the state comes down and says, no, you know, this isn't a realistic assessment.
Yeah, so what the state does is have the GSPs submitted, and they go through a review process. They issue their staff report that has a number of recommendations for each plan, and they either approve the plans or they deem them, I think inadequate is the term that they use. There are several basins in the San Joaquin Valley who are at the phase where DWR has rejected the plan and deemed it inadequate. And they're in the phase now where they have to coordinate internally within the basin, get realistic expectations and assumptions incorporated into their modeling, and figure out how to manage the basin sustainably. I think what it'll come down to is both implementation of the projects that they've already identified, and frankly, doing better water conservation, water use efficiency, and associated pumping reductions from users throughout those basins. There's really, you know, when you're looking at a water balance, there's only so much water. So whatever comes in, you can only take out, you know, that amount on the other side. So I think that the hard decisions that the agencies are making right now is, where does that additional conservation come from?
And what about the potential for rosier projections related to weather and El Nino? You know, and we've talked about this before, that, you know, last winter, big deal, right? And you know, this winter, maybe not as much, but still shaping up to be okay. Where does that play a role?
You know, I think some of your smaller, flashier basins that sort of fill and drain more quickly will have more rosy projections. They'll be able to show, hey, look, with the wet weather season of 22-23, we were able to fill up our basin. We'll be good for another couple of years. It sort of pushes off some of the tough choices that need to be made. For the larger basins throughout San Joaquin Valley, they simply don't fill that quickly. So yes, while we're making significant progress and water storage levels, groundwater elevations are increasing, the state is still sort of looking at the whole historical timeline back to 2015, which includes the last drought. And you really still have to make some realistic assumptions about how many of those years moving forward are going to be dry versus the incredible wet one we did just have.
Okay. And so what? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Robert. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, Randy, perhaps Randy or somebody in the webinar, one of our attendees, knowing all this now, all this information that's been provided, you're a municipal planner. What do you do with this information? How does this inform your decision making or your thought process? Randy, you're on mute. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking from my experience, it definitely impacts your population projections and how RHNA factors into that. I think one of the items that I guess wasn't addressed in this study that I have read some material about is domestic reuse of water. And, it's in some of the states highly critically impacted water basins. I'm thinking Pajara, I'm thinking of Monterey, that they're actually planning on treating and making available for domestic use treated wastewater. And, that is something that as a local land use planner, I would put on the possibilities of something that can become a source. There's obviously a lot of issues with that. A lot of those issues are perception and getting the public to accept that. I don't know if either Rosalind or Emily has any information regarding what's happening in other parts of the state or indeed other states. But I think that's a future that, to me, as a local land use planner, seems possible down the road.
Yeah, I'm working on a number of potable reuse projects, and there's sort of a few different ways to do it. You can advance treat water and put it back into the groundwater basin, and then it becomes part of your, pumped aquifer supply. You can advance treat water and put it into a reservoir, let that essentially blend with the native surface water before it's pumped out for domestic supply. Or just last month, December 19th of 2023, the state just adopted their potable reuse direct potable reuse regulations. If you put enough advanced treatment, so enough different kinds of treatment processes, one after the other in your treatment train, and you have enough security there, you can actually go flange to flange, putting that advanced treated water straight into your drinking water system. There's no agency that does that yet, but there are dozens of agencies throughout the state that do potable reuse, mostly groundwater recharge projects. It's certainly a new source of supply. It just has to be counted for in the water balance. Because like Emily was saying earlier, in many cases, that recycled water supply, if it's not directly used now, does actually get out into the groundwater basin through infiltration basins, through waste discharge processes. Might not go into the right basin, or maybe a sort of sink portion of the basin that's not used. But in many cases, it does actually become part of the groundwater supply. Yeah. I think that potable reuse and further treatment of wastewater supplies is absolutely going to continue expanding throughout the state. I mean, almost many agencies, certainly across Southern California, are already doing it.
I like to hear, I haven't been involved like in the fine details of the RHNA process on the allocation level at the COG level, but I imagine does this come up? And I'd like to hear from our folks in Kern, is how do you address this issue with HCD in this last cycle of your RHNA? And we can unmute you if you'd like to share your experiences, if any, on this topic. Okay, well, we tried getting some input there. And then, so to our consultants, what does this mean in terms of our communication with HCD? Is this something we're sharing with them, having a conversation with them? Or, you know, is it similar to Coachella Valley, other places with water problems? I mean, what is your recommendation on how we convey this information, this report to HCD?
You know, I think it actually would be a great conversation to have with the state and make sure that, you know, as part of Sigma, there was a specific concerted effort that Sigma made to have the water agencies directly coordinate with land use planners on their demand forecasts. But I think that it isn't done often enough, early and often, you know, sort of is a term that we use for outreach programs. And I think that more of an effort needs to be made on the part of the GSAs to make sure that they are recognizing and incorporating the RHNA numbers as they're coming in each cycle, and they're incorporating those into the demand forecast. There's always the sort of stagger between when the numbers come out and when you do your demand forecast, and then when you know, sort of release your plan. But I think that the ongoing coordination between the land use community and the water community is so critical. And there is the connection point, you know, when water supply assessments are completed for new developments and things like that, that, you know, there are those touch points that happen. And I think this just needs to be one of them that is strengthened. But communicating that to the state, yes, certainly should be done.
We all have our silos of information, and it's very hard to cross from one silo to the other. But RHNA requires that, and so that is a new effort on the part of both water providers as well as land use planners, and then looking at how that gets incorporated at the policy level, I think is very challenging because usually there's just a bias that we'll build our way out of the problem, and that, you know, will create another water storage system and so forth. And you know, from what little research I've done on this, all the good places to have reservoirs and dams have all been taken. And so now we're at the suboptimal level, and those are being taken. And so it gets me back to reuse of with recycled water. That's probably, you know, if you look at it from my opinion, if you look at it strictly from an economic point, that's the cheapest source of water that's out there in the future. You can get tertiary treatment far cheaper per acre foot than you can get it from dams and rivers, and you know, maybe we employ cloud seeding services and rainmakers to somehow bring more rain into the mix. But I think that's less likely than the reuse option.
We do have another question from Carl Davison in Kern, who says, I'm also watching San Luis Obispo County situation related to RHNA and Sigma. And that is a big deal. So I don't know if you have any insight on that, Emily or Rosalind.
I can't speak to San Luis Obispo County. I'm not working there.
I can't speak to San Luis Obispo County either, fortunately.
Yeah, they've been under some pretty severe water constraints for seems like a couple of decades now. So okay, I think that is all the questions that we have at this time. Mike, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Again, thank you, Rincon Consultants. Appreciate all the hard work you put into this. I think this is very interesting and compelling and relevant study that had to be done, and so we appreciate all the work and helped me understand the water system in the valley a lot better. So kudos to you there. Again, everybody, we will post this to the website. I'll send you an email with the links in a couple of days. We'll get the final report to you out as well. Again, I put a couple of things in the chat in terms of events coming up. And then the next REAP webinar we're looking at having in March probably will highlight some REAP funded projects across the valley, just to give you an idea of what's been going on the last couple of years. So that's it at this time. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
You.
Bye.